Welcome to this Rural School Advocates of Iowa video to cover legislative issues pending for the 2018 legislative session. Your leadership group folks talked about needing a resource to communicate with new board members and experienced board members that are members of the Rural School Advocates of Iowa in preparations for advocacy before the session starts. So Larry and I are here today to do that. I'm Margaret Buckton. I'm both your professional advocate at RSAI and a partner at ISFIS. And Larry is joining us today, too. He brings lots of school finance expertise and data expertise to actually give you the information you need to be good advocates. So what are we going to cover today, Larry?
Well, we're going to cover the state budget, setting the stage for the 2018 session. We'll look at some of the 2017 accomplishments, check some of those things off the list. And for 2018, we're going to look at some of the specific priorities for RSAI and some advocacy actions.
Well, why don't we start with the state of the state budget? So after the 2017 legislative session, where do we find ourselves today?
Well, we found ourselves with the REC having growth of 3.6%, estimated for both 2018 and 2019. Now, they did appropriate $20 million in the FY 2018 budget and plan on $111 million in 2019 budget to pay back that loan from the state savings account. That's a choice. The EEF would naturally replenish through the course of the state's budgeting process. Governor Reynolds transferred $13 million from the reserves to make up the FY 2017 shortfall to close the fiscal year. And Iowa Code requires that they reimburse the Economic Emergency Fund during the next session for the $13 million.
Okay, so just to get this straight, they're required by law to pay back the $13 million, but the amount that they borrowed, the $131 million to close out the budget, that they don't necessarily have to appropriate in this next budget.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
That's exactly right. The Legislative Services Agency report says the combined balance of the reserve funds for FY 2017 after the $13 million transfer is made is estimated at $605.3 million. So it's not like they don't have resources that are available to them. So, you know, we see a continued tight budget, even with this 3.6 revenue growth, which really isn't too bad. Much of that new revenue is going to be eaten up for things like Medicaid increases, other built-in expenditures, and paying back the Economic Emergency Fund. There will continue to be discussions about priorities regarding what is left.
You bet. And, you know, K-12 schools fared fairly well in the 2017 session. If you talk to your community college neighbors or the Regents institutions or many other entities of state government, they received some significant cuts. So getting the amount that we got for state supplemental assistance last year, and we'll talk about that in a minute, that should be seen as a comparative setting of the priority for education in the budget.
You know, in the RSAI Legislative Digest does include a list of the tax credits on page 12, which is estimated at a total of $432 million. That's a 20% increase in just 2 years. The commercial and industrial property tax credits and local government hold harmless payments also cost the state a lot of money. $123 million for the business property tax credit, $152 million appropriation to local governments, another $44.9 million increase to the state due to lower valuations, which is $321 million total for the commercial and industrial property tax relief passed several years ago.
So just those two kinds of policy choices, $250 million that's being provided to somebody in terms of a tax relief proposal as they're struggling to pay for state government.
But is not available for expenditure. That's the problem. Well, Margaret, why don't you talk about some of the accomplishments?
Well, sure. So this last legislative session, there were several bills that give your local school board some additional authority and flexibility, too. So House File 573 was on RSAI's priority list. It was to replace the Dillon's Rule framework for decision-making with Home Rule, and Home Rule simply states that your local board gets to operate in that realm of the undefined. You don't have to have permission to take an action. You still have to do what's required by law. You're prohibited from doing what's prohibited. But in those gray areas, the local school district has more authority. House File 564 deals with specific categorical funds. It provides flexibility in many of those funds. A couple of those were really on RSAI's priority list. We talked about the Student Activity Fund being able to transfer general funds to the Student Activity Fund for safety equipment, and that was included and is actually retroactive to the prior fiscal year. The flexibility in dropout prevention, being able to determine how much of your counselor's time actually supporting that population or doing grade level, school level, or building level professional development without having to specifically identify students as eligible, those things were really priorities for RSAI as well. And there's additional flexibility in the preschool and professional development, and the formula supplements are required, the DE is required to defer to local interpretation on those. And then lastly, House File 565, you won't be able to take advantage of this until the fiscal 19 budget year, but you can begin preparing for it. I think of this as our super flexibility fund. Any ending balances in several designated categorical funds can be redirected by your school board to some other general fund purpose that you think is more important. Additionally, we had a priority to have an aligned state assessment that acknowledges the costs of being able to deliver that test on a computer-based or technology-based platform. Senate File 240 was approved last session. It is required to be aligned to our core standards. It includes a growth factor, and really, most importantly, it takes the legislature out of the equation. And it does require that there's a paper-pencil option for those school districts that have technology challenges. Now, depending on when you're actually watching this video, the decision on who that vendor may be for that test provider may have already been made and announced. It was scheduled for the end of September. Well, school funding and school mandates are also issues that the Rural School Advocates of Iowa had prioritized having more of one and less of the other. Which can you guess that is, Larry? Maybe some more funding and less mandates. So the state supplemental assistance, or our cost per pupil increase, was set at 1.11%. Although low, that was set early, and it stayed at that level despite the fact that the REC came in later during the session and lowered their estimates, and there were additional reductions to the budget later in the session. So schools still were spared that additional decrease. Senate File 166 not only set that cost per student, but also changed the process of when the legislature is required to set that figure. It used to be it was 18 months ahead of the budget year. This bill eliminated that requirement, so now expect to see your SSA rate, or your per pupil rate, set within 30 days of when the governor releases her budget as the session starts next year, but that will be immediately preceding the fiscal year in which it applies. They also finished the rollout of teacher leadership and compensation, so now all districts are participating in that. It's no longer a grant that requires an appropriation. It's included in the formula, and it's there as a per pupil supplement. The early literacy funding had traditionally been at $8 million. There was a slight reduction to that at $7.8 million, but they eliminated a couple of the mandates that were particularly problematic for our rural school members. The third grade mandatory retention for students not proficient in reading, or providing a summer school experience. Those particular requirements were repealed, and now they're permissive. You may do that with those funds if you'd like to, but you're not required to. And lastly, the standings bill did cut the AEA's $15 million. That was slightly a lower cut than the prior year that was $18.25 million, but still not close to restoring the funds that the AEAs expect through the formula. So as we think about the next legislative session, there was progress made on several things that were priorities for RSAI last year. Larry, why don't you talk about the first one of those, our operational sharing incentives?
You bet. House File 633 was the operational sharing incentives extension, and bill eliminated the sunset on the sharing incentives. It extends those permanently. It eliminates the 5-year limitation on any position shared, but doesn't change those positions that are authorized in the existing code. It was approved in the House on a 99-0 vote. Then it was assigned to Senate Appropriations Committee on April 18th, and unfortunately time just ran out. So for the 2018 session, there's some interim advocacy that you can do. You can talk to your senators, especially those on the Appropriations Committee, about speedy action in 2018. And the FY 2017 supplementary weighting was equal to 2,815 students, and is estimated at $18.6 million. 160 school districts utilize these sharing incentives, and I think that's pretty significant.
It is, because it's certainly not all districts, but those who count on them, it will seem like a cut of $18.6 million to many of our smaller school districts if they don't find a way to extend these incentives.
And if you're at the full 21 positions, that's worth about $150,000, a little better than that to you. So it's significant funding for many districts.
You bet. two of the priorities of RSAI were folded into one piece of legislation, Senate File 455. You know, I went back to 2008 and looked at every single year how many times we'd had a transportation equality or funding bill introduced in the session, and there were at least one and as many as 12 in any one of those years, but they never made it out of a committee until this last year. And I think it's because this bill combines these two issues, really. It does two things, and both of them phase in over a 10-year period. It provides funding for transportation costs based on a formula, and 90% of that is the last 3 years' transportation expenditures, 10% of that's based on enrollment. Then it also has a state funding to raise up the district cost per pupil to the maximum, which eliminates that $175 difference in district cost per pupil across the state. Background on both of those, because they're complicated issues, you can also find in your RSAI Legislative Digest. There are position papers on all of these issues available to you there. The bill was approved unanimously in the Senate. It was approved with only one no vote in House Education, so pretty overwhelming support. Now it sits in House Appropriations and is still alive for the 2018 session. So the same thing as Larry just said about operational sharing incentives, but the other side of the Capitol Rotunda, your advocacy for this is really with your House members. The business community and parents are critical for both of these as they are keenly interested in issues of equity and things that impact property taxes too. So continue to build urgency for this. It will depend on this being more important than other things if the state budget continues to suffer from the self-imposed tax credit and exemption policies that they've put themselves under. Just a little data about transportation. We look clear back to fiscal 15 on this one when the state cost per pupil was $6,366, and at that time there were an estimated 41 Iowa school districts that spent more of 10% of that funding on their cost per pupil just to get students to the door. In the most recent DE transportation report, the fiscal 16 report, it shows you the inequity of this, that the range of expenditures per student enrolled is from a low of just over $13 to a high of almost $15 per student enrolled. The square miles per district also has a huge range from a low of 2 to a high of 555, and route miles range from a low of 922 to a high of almost 1.3 million miles. And just a reminder, your school general fund pays for transportation. That's also the money that pays for teachers and staff and textbook and utilities. So it's not surprising that districts with high transportation costs pay their teachers less and may have older textbooks. Well, the SAVE extension. I know a lot of people have been talking about sales tax, Larry. You want to cover this one?
Absolutely. That bill extends that, House File 230 extends that sunset from December 2029 to January 1st, 2015. There are no other changes in use in the process. And the current bill sponsors include Kester, Dolacek, Taylor, Moore, Salmon, Landon, Momsen, Gassman, Carlin, Fry, Hartshill, and Eisenhart. That's kind of a nice collection of sponsors. Yes, it is. And it's in House Ways and Means. It's still alive for the 2018 session. And the interim advocacy is to go recruit additional sponsors, ask for support. We're going to have to work with governor's office as well, so connections with the either lieutenant governor or the governor in the meantime. And the business community and Farm Bureau can also help. So talk to your senators and representatives over the next month or two. Ask them to vote yes if the bill comes to them to extend the state penny. This is a vitally important issue for school districts, and I think one of the reasons so vital is if you look at the chart that's on the screen right now, is you can look at before the state penny was put into place, or even before the local option sales tax was put into place, you know, we would average 40 or 50 or even 55 in this case bond elections in a given year. Now remember, those bond elections are all property tax, and you can see how the number of those fell dramatically until in 2009, after the state penny was passed, fell to a low in fiscal year 11 of 9 bond issues compared to that 40 or 50 or 60 in a given year. So people have overwhelmingly said that they'd rather use sales tax to build buildings than the property tax. But you can see that it starts to go up again, and part of that reason is because of that compressed funding stream that is available because of the 2029 sunset. There are some districts that need facilities that simply don't have any option but to pass a bond issue to do that. So hopefully if we can get this, the SAVE extension going, we can get those number of bond issues back down to that single-digit number.
You bet. And that sales tax, although it's critical for school infrastructure, it's also really important for all of the equipment we need for career and technical education, for all of your technology and one-to-one initiatives, and you know, other things that otherwise PEPAL is going to have to pay for. So it provides opportunities for property tax relief throughout the way schools are funded.
Yep, absolutely. And I think the other thing about it is it's really important to think about what your individual story is as you go forward. What have you done with your saved dollars? You know, some districts have done one-to-one initiatives or you know, air-conditioned buildings or replaced buildings that they would have had to use property taxes for. So knowing what you spent your money on, I think, is really critical when you're talking with legislators.
Another really important talking point in this area of state extension is about local decision making. You know, all the bills we covered at the beginning of this video about trusting local leaders to make the best decisions, they can do that with the state penny too, because you're going to have a contract with your local voters through your revenue purpose statement. The voters are going to weigh in on how the money is spent, and then school districts are held to that permission that the voters give them. So there's already a process in there for both voter input and local decision making. Well, we've got several areas of student inequities and student-driven needs that remain yet to be attended to. RSAI has had a longstanding priority about poverty, and it's not surprising when you look at poverty levels across the state is no longer just an urban issue. The entire southern tier of Iowa, the third, has a really high, more than 41% of their students eligible for free and reduced lunch. There was a bill that had a supplementary weighting. It was introduced but hasn't had a subcommittee hearing. There's a companion bill over in the House that's similar. We'll have to continue to work for that, and that may be more of a long-term goal as we try and figure out how the state budget is going to recover from its current situation. The same thing with preschool weighting. It's currently a 0.5